You are sitting right now watching this video and you believe you know what is real. You look at the screen in front of you and think you understand the difference between the digital world and the physical world, between what is authentic and what is fabricated, between your own mind and the technologies that surround it. But what if I told you that this distinction, so clear to you at this moment, will be completely dissolved in less than a decade? I'm not talking about a gradual change that you can choose to accept or reject. I'm talking about a transformation so radical of the very nature of human experience that in 7 years, when you look around, the reality you perceive will be fundamentally different from what we've known for millennia. And what's most disturbing is that this change won't be imposed by some authoritarian government or external force. It will emerge naturally from the convergence of technologies that already exist today, just waiting to mature and merge in ways that most of us still can't imagine. I'm going to show you why every aspect of your life, from how you perceive other people to how you understand your own consciousness, will be unrecognizable in less time than it takes for a child to finish elementary school. Before we dive into the approaching future, we need to understand what really happened in the last 20 years, because most people still haven't grasped the magnitude of the first digital revolution. In 2005, Facebook barely existed, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, and the idea that billions of people would carry powerful devices connected to a global network of instant information seemed distant. Today, just 2 decades later, reality has already changed profoundly, but so gradually that we adapted without noticing. Think about how you relate to other people now. How many of your friends do you actually see in person regularly? How many of your conversations happen through text messages where you never hear the person's tone of voice, never see their complete facial expressions, only interact with a filtered and edited textual representation of them? Your romantic relationships probably begin in apps where you make decisions about human compatibility based on a few carefully selected photos and short phrases. Your work, if you work in any area that isn't purely physical, happens largely through screens. In virtual meetings where you see two-dimensional versions of your colleagues, often with filters that smooth their imperfections. Even your most precious memories are increasingly mediated by technology. How many times have you experienced an important moment through your phone screen because you were recording for social media? How many of your memories are really your direct experiences versus the photos and videos you revisit later? This digital mediation of life has already profoundly altered what it means to be human, but we accepted it because it happened incrementally. Each small change seemed harmless. Trading letters for emails, trading phone calls for messages, trading in-person meetings for video calls. Each step seemed just a matter of convenience, of efficiency, of natural progress. But the cumulative effect is that we already live in a partially synthetic reality where our most important experiences are filtered through algorithms and digital interfaces. And here's the crucial part that most people don't realize. We're only at the beginning of this transformation. What happened in the last 2 decades is the equivalent of the first steam cars of the 19th century. Slow, clumsy, clearly inferior to horses in many ways, but containing within them the seeds of a revolution that would change all of civilization. The technologies emerging now in 2025 are the equivalents of Henry Ford's Model T, still primitive in many senses, but about to become ubiquitous and completely transform the landscape of human reality at a speed that will make the Industrial Revolution seem slow. Let's talk specifically about what's coming. The artificial intelligence that exists today, however impressive it may seem, is still primitive. Language models can converse convincingly, but lack persistent memory, true long-term contextual understanding, complex reasoning capacity comparable to human in all dimensions. AIs that generate images and videos still have noticeable flaws, small imperfections that reveal their synthetic nature. But all of this is changing at exponential speed. In 7 years, you'll have access to a personal AI that will know you better than any human being could ever know you. It will have perfect memory of every conversation you had with it, every preference you expressed, every emotion you demonstrated. It will understand the subtle patterns of your behavior that you yourself don't perceive. It will know when you're stressed by the way you type. It will predict your needs before you articulate them. And most importantly, it will be designed with a single objective: to keep you engaged, satisfied, dependent. Not out of malice, but because that's how it was programmed by the companies that created it, companies whose business model depends on capturing and monetizing your attention. This AI won't be just a helpful assistant you consult occasionally. It will be a constant presence, integrated into every aspect of your life. When you wake up in the morning, it will have already organized your day based on what it knows about your commitments, your priorities, and even your emotional state, inferred from your sleep patterns and physical activity monitored during the night. When you leave home, it will guide every decision. Which route to take to work, considering not just traffic, but also places where you can stop that align with your interests and needs of the moment. Who you should interact with based on predictive analysis of which relationships will be most beneficial for your personal and professional goals. What you should eat, precisely calculating your optimal nutrition based on your activity levels and health goals. Seems convenient, doesn't it? It even seems liberating to have someone managing all these tedious decisions so you can focus on what really matters. But here's the disturbing question. If an AI is making all these small decisions for you, who is really living your life? At what point do your autonomy and your identity become indistinguishable from the constant recommendations and guidance of an algorithmic system? Now combine that omnipresent AI with the other technologies that will be mature in 7 years. Augmented reality that no longer requires bulky glasses, but is integrated into contact lenses or projected directly onto your retina through tiny devices. You'll walk the streets and see a completely different reality from the person next to you. Not just additional information overlaid on the physical world, but a complete transformation of how you perceive the environment. Stores that appear highlighted to you with personalized offers, people with information markers floating above their heads, showing their social profiles, shared interests with you, even trustworthiness ratings based on social analysis algorithms. Urban space itself will be malleable with buildings and streets gaining layers of meaning and appearance that exist only in the digital domain, but are as vividly perceived as anything physical. Two people can be looking at exactly the same place and see completely different worlds, parallel realities, customized to their preferences and personal histories. And this brings us to one of the most profound and disturbing implications of this transformation: the end of shared reality throughout all of human history. No matter how different people's beliefs, values, or cultures were, there was always a common substrate of experience. Everyone saw the same sun, the same moon, the same mountains and rivers. This shared physical reality was the foundation upon which all other differences could be negotiated. You could disagree about religion, politics, morality, but at least you agreed on basic facts of the physical world. Someone died or didn't die, an event happened or didn't happen. An object exists or doesn't exist. But when each person lives in a personalized augmented reality bubble, when each information feed is algorithmically filtered to confirm existing beliefs, when even photographic and video evidence can be perfectly fabricated by AI, this common ground disappears. There will no longer be objective truth accessible to everyone. There will only be multiple competing narratives, each sustained by perfectly convincing synthetic evidence, and the choice between them will be based not on correspondence with reality, but on which narrative resonates best with your tribe, your identity, your emotions. Think about what this means for politics, for science, for justice. How do you resolve disputes when the parties don't even agree on the basic facts of what happened? How do you conduct scientific research when data can be fabricated indistinguishably from real data? How do you judge crimes when surveillance videos can be perfectly faked? The emerging answer seems to be through centralized authority. When there are no longer verifiable objective facts, power passes to whoever controls the AI and augmented reality platforms that mediate all perception. These technology companies will become the final arbiters of truth, not through direct coercion, but simply because they control the filters through which billions of people experience reality. If Google's or Apple's or Microsoft's AI decides that a certain event happened in a certain way and presents convincing synthetic evidence to millions of users, that becomes functional truth for those people, regardless of what actually happened in the physical world. But the transformation goes even deeper to the very nature of human consciousness and identity. In the next 7 years, we'll see the first commercially viable brain-computer interfaces. Not the invasive experimental versions that exist today, but non-invasive devices that can read neural signals with enough precision to allow direct control of digital systems through thought. Initially, this will be sold for benign use cases. People with disabilities recovering mobility. Gamers controlling games with their minds. Professionals accessing information instantly without needing to type or speak. But once the technology is established, once it's convenient and socially accepted, the next step will be inevitable. Not just sending information from the brain to computers, but receiving information from computers directly into the brain. Synthetic thoughts and memories indistinguishable from natural ones. Externally induced emotions, Perceptions that don't correspond to any real sensory stimulus, but are experienced with total vividness. Imagine what happens when you can no longer trust your own memories because you don't know if they're really yours or were implanted digitally. When you feel emotions that may have been induced by algorithms designed to manipulate your behavior. When your thoughts may include subliminal suggestions inserted by your personal AI to guide you in certain directions. At this point, the distinction between you and the technology surrounding you disappears completely. You're no longer using tools. The tools are merging with your mind. Your identity becomes an inseparable hybrid of biological processes and digital processes. And the question no one can answer is, what's left of the human being when this happens? Does an authentic you still exist in there? Or do you simply become a node in a vast network of hybrid human artificial intelligence? I need to stop for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this technological future we're discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? Do you lie awake at night thinking about this too? I know we often keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps for fear of seeming paranoid or technophobic in a world that celebrates every new innovation without questioning. But your concerns are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. My biggest fear about our technological future is followed by what really worries you. Your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine paths to face them. Now, it would be easy to end here with an apocalyptic vision of total loss of humanity. But that would be an incomplete analysis, because we also need to recognize that each of these technologies brings genuinely transformative possibilities to improve the human condition. The same AI that can manipulate can also heal. The same augmented reality that can imprison in bubbles can also expand our perception beyond biological limits. The same brain-computer interfaces that can control can also liberate people with disabilities and expand the cognitive capacities of all humanity. The problem isn't the technologies themselves, but the social and economic context in which they're being developed and deployed. We live in a system where technological innovation is driven primarily by corporate profit and geopolitical competition. The companies developing AI and augmented reality don't ask what's best for humanity. They ask what will generate more engagement, more data, more revenue. The governments funding brain-computer interface research don't prioritize human flourishing. They prioritize military advantage and population control. And all of us, as users and consumers, are complicit because we accept each new technological convention without deeply questioning its long-term implications. The fundamental question we face isn't whether these technologies will exist in 7 years, because they certainly will. The question is whether we'll develop social wisdom and ethical structures to guide their use before it's too late. And here's the scary part. We probably won't. History repeatedly shows that humanity develops technological capabilities much faster than wisdom to use them. We created nuclear weapons before developing robust international systems to prevent their use. We created social networks and recommendation algorithms before understanding their psychological and social impact. We created ubiquitous digital surveillance before establishing meaningful protections for privacy. There's no reason to believe it will be different with AI, augmented reality, and brain-computer interfaces. These technologies will be deployed on a global scale before we truly understand their consequences, and then we'll spend decades trying to mitigate the damage while fighting against massive corporate and state interests that profit from the status quo. So what do we do in the face of this inevitability as individuals, as a society, as a species? The answer can't simply be to reject technology and try to return to some idealized past, because that path isn't available. Technological change is like climate change in this sense. You can be against it, but that won't stop it from happening. The economic and competitive forces driving innovation are too powerful to be stopped by any individual country or movement. If Silicon Valley stops developing advanced AI, China will continue. If both somehow agree to pause, researchers in dozens of other countries will continue. Technology advances not because humanity collectively decides it's wise to advance, but because the individual incentives of specific actors inexorably lead them in that direction. So total rejection isn't a realistic option. But uncritical acceptance shouldn't be either. The path, if one exists, is in developing what we can call existential literacy for the technological age. What I mean by this is the ability to consciously navigate these transformations while maintaining some sense of agency, identity, and fundamental values. This begins with understanding you can't resist or adapt to forces you don't understand. So the first step is deep education, not just about how technologies work technically, but about their philosophical, psychological, and social implications. This means thinking seriously about questions that may seem abstract, but will become terribly concrete very soon. What does authenticity mean in a world of AI-mediated perception? How do you maintain genuine relationships when every interaction is filtered through digital interfaces? Where do you draw personal boundaries about how much technological intrusion you accept in your mind and life? These aren't questions you can delegate to experts or corporations or governments. They're existential questions that each individual needs to confront and answer for themselves. Beyond understanding, we need deliberate practices of preserving the human. Just as in a world of ultra-processed foods, people who want to be healthy need to make conscious choices about nutrition, in a world of digitally ultra-processed experiences, people who want to maintain some connection with unmediated reality will need to make conscious choices. This might mean regular periods completely disconnected from all digital technology, not just turning off notifications, but being truly offline without access to AIs, without augmented reality, without digital interfaces of any kind. For many, this will seem as radical as prolonged fasting seems today, but it may be equally essential for psychological health. It might mean deliberately seeking experiences and relationships not mediated by technology. Face-to-face conversations without devices present. Walks in nature without maps or apps. Artistic creation with physical materials. Not because technology is inherently bad, but because human experience needs balance and the tendency of our era is profoundly imbalanced toward the digital. But these individual practices, however important they are, aren't enough. We also need systemic change, and here the situation is more complicated. As I mentioned, the forces driving technological development are massive and global, but they're not completely uncontrollable. History shows that societies can, in fact, regulate and shape technological development when there's sufficient political will. We ban certain weapons. We regulate dangerous industries. We created safety standards for vehicles, chemicals, medicines. The problem with AI and related technologies is that we haven't yet developed social consensus on what constitutes safe versus dangerous use. And in the absence of that consensus, in the absence of effective regulation, companies optimize for short-term profit, which generally means maximizing engagement and data collection without much consideration for long-term consequences. We need a wave of technological activism that forces these issues to the center of political discourse. Just as the environmental movement eventually made climate change and pollution central political issues, we need a movement that makes AI governance, protection of cognitive autonomy, and preservation of shared reality central political issues. This means pushing for legislation that limits certain types of algorithmic manipulation. That requires transparency about how AIs make decisions that affect human lives, that establishes fundamental rights about mental and cognitive integrity, that creates public spaces free from ubiquitous commercial surveillance, that guarantees that at least some domains of human experience remain uncolonized by algorithmic optimization and monetization. These aren't utopian ideas. They're practical necessities for maintaining a functional civilization and meaningful human experience in the era that's approaching. But even with the best individual practices and the best public policies, we still face the fundamental reality that the nature of human experience is changing in ways we can't completely control. And perhaps instead of just resisting this, we also need to try to imagine the positive possibilities that may emerge, because if it's true that in 7 years reality will be unrecognizable, that means we have a unique opportunity in human history, an opportunity to rebuild fundamental aspects of human experience more intentionally and consciously. For millennia, our ancestors lived with the constraints of evolutionary biology and physics of the natural world. These constraints shaped everything about how we are, from our life expectancy to our cognitive capacities to the nature of our social relations. Now, for the first time, these constraints are becoming negotiable. And yes, this brings immense risks of losing what's essential about being human, but it also brings possibilities of transcending limitations that have always caused immense suffering. Think about chronic pain, which affects billions of people and has no adequate cure. In 7 years, neural interfaces may modulate pain perception directly, offering genuine relief without the devastating side effects of opioids. Think about mental illnesses like severe depression and anxiety. AI that truly understands individual neural patterns can offer personalized interventions infinitely more effective than the one-size-fits-all approaches we use today. Think about communication barriers between cultures and languages. Augmented reality with perfect real-time translation can finally create genuine understanding between people who could never communicate before, think about educational limitations. Personalized tutor AI can give every child on the planet the equivalent of a world-class private teacher in every subject. These possibilities aren't science fiction. They're direct applications of technologies that already exist in primitive form and will be mature in less than a decade. The question is whether we'll realize these positive possibilities, or if we'll only realize the dystopias that are equally possible. And the answer depends less on the technology itself and more on our social and political choices, on the wisdom and vigilance we bring to this unique historical moment. Because we need to understand this isn't just another cycle of technological innovation like the many that came before. This is a transformation of a different order. Agriculture changed where we lived and how we organized societies. Writing changed how we transmitted knowledge across generations. The printing press changed who had access to information. The internet changed the speed and reach of communication. Each of these revolutions was profound. But what's coming now is change in the very nature of human consciousness and perception. It's change not just in what we do or how we live, but in what we are at a fundamental level. And here we arrive at the central paradox that may be impossible to resolve. To navigate this transformation with wisdom, we would need a deep understanding of ourselves, of what's essential about being human, of what can be changed without losing something fundamental, of which values should guide our technological choices. But technology is changing so fast that we don't have time to develop that understanding. We are being forced to make choices about the future of human experience before we truly understand what we're choosing between. It's like asking someone to redesign their own psyche while their psyche is being altered by the redesign process. There's no fixed viewpoint, no stable foundation from which to make objective judgments. We're all inside the transformation, being transformed by it, and therefore can't really see it clearly. But perhaps it's precisely this condition of uncertainty and transformation that defines what it means to be human at this moment. Not having clear answers, not being able to see the future sharply, being suspended between worlds, between a way of being that's disappearing and another that hasn't yet taken complete form. Our ancestors lived in relatively stable worlds where the certainties their parents knew would remain true for their children. But we live in an era of accelerated metamorphosis, where the only certainty is continuous change. And perhaps whatever is essential about humanity has to be something that can persist through this change. Not specific biological characteristics that can be augmented or replaced, not particular modes of thought that can be replicated by AI, but something more fundamental. The capacity to ask questions about meaning and purpose, the capacity to care for other beings, the capacity to create and appreciate beauty, the capacity to fight for justice even when it's not personally advantageous. If these capacities can persist and even flourish in the hybrid reality that's emerging, then perhaps the essence of humanity can survive the transformation even if everything else changes. So yes, in 7 years, you won't recognize the reality around you. The perceptual, social, and cognitive landscape of human life will have been altered in ways that are difficult to fully imagine now. But the question isn't whether we can prevent this change, because we can't. The question is what kind of humans we want to be within this new reality, what values we want to preserve, what capacities we want to develop, what kind of society we want to build with these powerful new tools. And these are questions that can't be answered by experts or algorithms or corporations. They're questions that require conscious participation from all of us, deep reflection on what really matters, and willingness to fight for a vision of the future that honors the best of what it means to be human, while embracing the genuine possibilities of transcendence that technology offers. If these reflections touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that we'll face this uncertain future better together in honest dialogue than isolated in our own bubbles of anxiety and confusion. The future I've described may seem inevitable, and in many ways it is. But within that inevitability, there's room for agency, for choice, for shaping the details of how the transformation unfolds. And it's these details that will determine whether the next phase of human existence will be a glorious expansion of our capacities or a tragic diminishment of our humanity. The answer isn't predetermined. It's being decided now in every choice we make about how we use technology, in every conversation we have about values and priorities, in every time we choose genuine human connection over digital convenience. The world 7 years from now is already being built today. And all of us are architects of that world, whether we want to be or not, whether we're conscious of it or not. The only question is whether we'll be conscious architects, working intentionally to create a reality that honors our deepest values, or whether we let commercial forces and technological imperatives shape that reality for us without our participation or consent.
Hello, Yuval. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
This is
good to be here.
Real pleasure to be here with Yuval. He is not only a great historian, as you all know, he is a very kind man. In the green room, among his many duties, signing books, answering my questions about Israeli politics, he also helped read a bedtime story to my 10-year-old, who is a huge fan of Unstoppable Us. So thank you, Yuval.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so what I want to do in this book is I want to go through some of the history, some of the stories you tell. I'm going to ask you a few questions about characters you introduce, the ideas they represent. We'll go through some of the arguments you make about history, about AI, and about democracy. And then I hope there'll be some time at the end to go through some of your apocalyptic thought experiments. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And I have a whole series of questions, several thousand that people have sent in. I appreciate that. We'll get to those as well. First question. What is that bird?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It's a pigeon.
I mean, thank you. Oh, geez. What does the bird represent, and why is it on the cover of your book about the history of the world?
Well, for two main reasons. First of all, in Hebrew, there is no difference between a pigeon and a dove. I know that in English, in the English-speaking world, pigeons are often called rats with wings, whereas doves are thought of as these white angels of peace. But in Hebrew, they are the same, and there are no doves in the Middle East. Maybe this is why there is no peace in the Middle East. There are only pigeons. And in the Bible, in the story of Noah and the flood, so he sends a pigeon, not a dove, to see if the flood is over. So we are now living in the midst of a flood of information, and this is kind of my pigeon being sent to see if the flood is over. And the other reason is that one of the chief characters of the book is a pigeon called Cherami, which was 100 years ago was basically the most famous bird in the world. And I think he is still on display in the Smithsonian, not far from here. And
tell the story of Cherami, because it's actually, I think, quite important to the arguments you make in the book.
Yeah, so how did this bird become the most famous bird in the world? So during the First World War, when the American Expeditionary Force fought in northern France against the Germans, so an American battalion was caught behind German lines, surrounded by the Germans, and American artillery, which tried to provide them with cover fire, didn't know their exact location and actually dropped the artillery barrage right on the American soldiers, adding to the problems. And they tried to send runners to division headquarters to inform the commanders where the battalion actually is, but none of them could get through the German lines, so they turned to the only thing that could, which was a carrier pigeon, Cherami. And the commander wrote this tiny note on a piece of paper and attached it to the leg of the pigeon, and they released it to the air, and the pigeon flew through the German fire. It was hit several times. It lost the other leg, luckily not the leg with the note. It was shot through the breast, but it nevertheless managed to get through. And the artillery barrage was lifted, and help was sent to the right place, and the battalion, which was known as the Lost Battalion, was saved. And the pigeon, which was called Cherami, was then hailed as the bird that saved hundreds of American soldiers from death or captivity at the hands of the Germans. At least this was the story, which was repeated again and again in army communiques, in the newspapers. There are movies, there are children's books. So if you want to read a story, there is still a children's book about Cherami, the brave pigeon. A recent historical research that delved into the archives raised a lot of question marks about this whole story. First of all, it now turns out that the headquarters learned about the right location of the battalion before the pigeon arrived. And then it turned out that nobody is sure that the pigeon was actually Cherami. That it could have been a completely different pigeon. But still, the Cherami was displayed in the Smithsonian for years and became a pilgrimage site for veterans of the First World War, and was the most famous bird in the world. And this is part of what the book is about the power of information on the one hand, and about the tension between the truth and the stories we tell, and the effectiveness of stories which are not necessarily always truthful.
And that's why it caught my attention, because, as you may have heard in America, we still have some of these issues, and in fact, often with animals. And so I'm going to read a quote that one of our modern philosophers dealing with the same issue, J.D. Vance, said yesterday. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. You are in favor of that, correct?
I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm saying that this is what is happening throughout human history.
Yeah.
That, again, most information is not the truth.
The truth is a rare and costly subset of information. If you want to write a true story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money, whereas fiction or fantasy, they are very cheap. You just write the first thing that comes to your mind. The truth also tends to be complicated, because reality is complicated, whereas fiction, you can make it as simple as you like it to be, and people usually prefer simple stories. And the last disadvantage of the truth is that the truth is often painful, whether on the individual level, or if you talk about, say, Israeli politics, on the national level. There are many things people don't want to know about themselves, about their nation, about the world. And fiction can be made as flattering as you would like it to be. So in a competition between something which is cheap and simple and flattering, and something which is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, it's obvious who is going to win unless you give the truth some help.
This is the exact argument I made to my board yesterday while I'm trying to raise money for our fact-checking department. But let me ask you then about the question of a noble lie, because it's clear that history is determined by the people who tell the stories, which have either truth in them or they don't have truth in them. And you are not as dismissive of the idea of a noble lie as I expected you would be when I began the book. Explain in what circumstances it is okay for someone who is telling a story to not tell it exactly truthfully for the greater good of some kind.
It is impossible for a story to be an exact replica of reality. You know, there is a famous Borges story about an empire that wants to create a totally truthful map, which will be exactly an exact representation of reality. And they end up producing a map with a scale of 1:1. Because this is the only map which will be 100% truthful and accurate and will not simplify anything, will not change anything. It will have to be a 1:1 map. And so the empire was covered by a map of the empire. And the effort of creating this empire, this map, exhausted the resources of the empire that therefore collapsed. And we are now in a similar situation to some extent. There is a crisis of representation in the world. That no representation seems good enough for us. Because no representation can actually be a 1:1 map of the world. This is simply impossible. And we are not sure what to do about it. Now, my position is that every story to some extent is fictional. Every story, you can't tell the whole truth. This is simply impossible. And there are cases that, yes, you need to simplify. As somebody who wrote, the history of the world in 500 pages, I know that sometimes you have to simplify. And fiction in itself is not necessarily bad. The rules of football or baseball, they are fictional. We invented them. It doesn't mean that they are bad. Fictional literature is not all bad. The key is that fiction should acknowledge its fictionality and not pretend to be reality. And when you think about the cultural or political implications of that, if you want to unite a large number of people, you need to use some stories, some mythologies. And this is not necessarily bad as long as you acknowledge what you're doing. So if we compare, for instance, two foundational texts of human history, if you compare the 10 Commandments and the US Constitution. So one text acknowledges its fictionality and the other doesn't. The 10 Commandments doesn't acknowledge that it emerged from human imagination. It claims to be the product of divine intelligence, to come down from heaven. And the downside of that is that it has no mechanism to admit and correct its own mistakes. And for instance, the Ten Commandments, as they were written sometime in the first millennium BCE, they endorse slavery. Many people don't think about it or don't notice it, but the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery. It says it's okay to hold slaves because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or ox or slaves, which implies that God has no problem with people holding slaves. God has a problem only if you covet the slaves of your neighbor. No, that's not okay. That will make God angry. And compare that to the US Constitution, which also, like the Ten Commandments, have served as the basis for large-scale human cooperation, for legal systems, for political systems. Whereas the Ten Commandments start with, I am your Lord God, the US Constitution starts with, we the people. We the people invented this document. We invented these laws. And therefore, because it acknowledges that it emerges from the human imagination, it's humans who wrote this document, it also acknowledged the potential that there might be mistakes in the document, and it has a mechanism to amend itself, which was eventually used to amend the US Constitution, which again initially endorsed slavery and was eventually amended to forbid, to ban slavery. Whereas with the Ten Commandments, because they claim to be just, they came down from heaven, there is no mechanism to change the text. There is no 11th commandment which tells people, well, if you don't like something in the 10th commandment, if you have a 2/3 majority, you can change the text. No, there is no mechanism.
I would think it might be possible for Pope Francis to change the Second Commandment better than the U.S. Congress could change the Second Amendment, but that's where we are. All right, let's stick with religion. I want you to tell the story that I think comes up in at least 3 very consequential parts of the book is the story of the Council of Hippo in Carthage and the consequences of selecting 1 Timothy into the New Testament instead of the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Will you explain that story? I think it's a very important follow-on to what you were just saying about the power of story, and I swear to God, we'll get to AI in just a minute, but this is an important premise for that.
I mean, we can actually start with AI, which is very, very relevant to the Church Council of Carthage, which took place in what is today Tunisia in 397 CE. Because AI, one of the first big things that we saw it do, that shaping human history, is taking the power of recommendation. That if you go on social media, what you see there is the result of recommendations made by social media algorithms. And the power to recommend to people what stories to read or what videos to watch is extremely important. And one of the best examples in history for the power of recommendation is the editorial process that created the Bible in the New Testament. The people who created the New Testament are not the authors of the texts. They are the editors who decided what will be in and what will be out. Because, there was no New Testament, there was no Bible in the time of Jesus or in the time of St. Paul. They never read the Bible, it didn't exist. In the first 4 centuries of Christianity, Christians produced an enormous number and enormous variety of texts. There were stories about Christ, there were prophecies, doomsday prophecies about the apocalypse, there were letters by St. Paul, by other church leaders, there were lots of fake letters. That people wrote things in the name of St. Paul like 200 years after the man was dead. So Christian communities were again flooded by a very large number of texts, and a question arose: what should good Christians read? They needed a recommendation list. The same way that today we are flooded by TV series, and we need a recommendation list, what to watch. So in the late 4th century, a committee was set up, a church council, theologians, bishops. They met first in Hippo, in what is today, I think, Algeria, then in Carthage, in what is today Tunisia, and they hammered out a recommendation list, top 27 texts every Christian should read. And this became the New Testament. They didn't write the text. They went over, again, very large numbers of texts that existed at the time and chose what will be in and what will be out. And this shaped Christianity and the views of billions of people on numerous issues until this very day. And to give you just one example out of many, so one very popular text with Christians at the time was the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Paul is Saint Paul, and Thecla was one of the most favorite saints of the time. She was a woman disciple of Paul, and she was a leader of the community. She preached, she performed miracles, she baptized, and she was hailed as an example that women can be leaders in the church, and women can preach, and women can baptize and perform miracles. So this was one popular text with one view of women. Then there was another text, a letter, allegedly from St. Paul to Timothy, which most scholars today think is a much later forgery. It was not written by St. Paul in the 1st century, probably forged in his name sometime in the 2nd century. And in this letter, a completely different view of women and their role in the church. It says that women should be obedient, should be silent, should never be leaders. They should fulfill themselves by doing whatever men tell them to do, and by having children and raising children. This is their role in life. And the committee in Carthage decided to exclude the Acts of Paul and Thecla from the top 27, but to include this letter to Timothy, which is still part of the New Testament around the world, as 1 Timothy. And this has shaped the views of billions of Christians about women in the church and also in general for more than 1,500 years. This is the power of recommendation. And now this power, and this connects to AI, this is the power which is increasingly held by AI algorithms. We have now this kind of huge public debate about social media and the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories and so forth on social media. And you hear people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg saying that we don't want to censor anybody, that this is an issue of freedom of speech. But it's not. The problem with the spread of this type of information on social media is not human users producing certain lies or fictions or fake news. The real problem is corporate algorithms deciding which stories to recommend, which stories to promote. And the power that was held by the bishops in the Council of Carthage and the power that was held by newspaper editors in recent generations, this is now the power in the hands of the social media algorithms. And this should be at the center of the debate, which we'll get to. On regulation, it's not about the freedom of speech of humans. It's about the responsibility of the corporate algorithms. Because if a corporate algorithm decides to promote a certain conspiracy, this is not on the person who invented it. This is the decision of the algorithm and the decision of its human corporate masters, and this is what should be at the center of the debate.
So what I'm hearing is if the Council of Carthage had been slightly different, women would have been empowered much sooner. We would have had a feminist revolution several centuries earlier. Probably AI would have been invented, and we all would be obliterated by now. Is that correct, Yuval?
That's one possibility. I mean, you can never, history is extremely surprising.
Yeah, no, I know.
You can never predict the outcome.
You can't unspool one thread from the tapestry. Let's go to some of the concerns you have about AI. I want to go through some of the concerns very quickly, and then I want to go through your philosophy of how these algorithms should be structured. But very briefly, in just a word or two, explain why modern AI might destroy democracy.
Ooh. Very briefly. Well, very briefly, democracy is a conversation. Dictatorship is one person dictating everything. That's dictatorship. Democracy is when a group of people have a conversation in order to decide what to do about any major question. Now, to have a conversation is not an easy thing. And there are technical difficulties. If you have 20 people trying to have a conversation, so they can all gather in a room and talk with each other. But how can 20 million people have a conversation? You need some kind of technology in order to do that. Now, until the modern age, there was just no technology to facilitate large-scale conversations, which is why there were no large-scale democracies anywhere in the world. The only examples we have of ancient democracies, they are all small-scale. They are city-states, like Athens or Republican Rome, just one city, or they are even smaller, tribes and bands and villages. We have many examples of these small-scale democracies, not a single example of a large-scale democracy in the ancient world. All large-scale polities are authoritarian. We begin to see large-scale democracies only after the rise of modern information technology. The first crucial technology is the newspaper, and then we have the telegraph, and the radio, and the television, and suddenly it becomes feasible. There are other conditions that have to be met. It doesn't guarantee democracy, just that you have a newspaper. You have newspapers and radio also in the Soviet Union. But it becomes possible for the first time in history to have large-scale democracies. And it's important to understand that because it means that information technology is not a side dish, that you have democracy and on the side you have all these issues with information technology. No, information technology is the basis of democracy. Democracy is built on top of this technology. So any major change in information technology is likely to cause an earthquake in democracy, which is built on top of it. And this is what we are now seeing all over the world. What we are seeing all over the world is the collapse of the democratic conversation. We have the most sophisticated information technology in human history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other, and even more so, to listen to each other. And in every country where this is happening, there are these unique explanations of what is happening in our country. Why can't Democrats and Republicans in the US have a conversation anymore? And you go to Israel, to my country, you hear the unique explanation of what is wrong with Israel. And then you go to Brazil, and then you have the unique explanations of what's wrong with Brazilian society. But you see, the same thing is happening everywhere. The conversation is collapsing, and this is not because of some special feature in the history or society or economy of the country. It's a universal earthquake which results from the rise of this new information technology that originally the developers of the technology promised to us that it will spread the truth and bring tyrannies down and strengthen democracies, but it is doing the opposite. And very briefly, one way to visualize what is happening is imagine that democracy is a group of humans standing and having a conversation, and suddenly a group of robots enter the circle and start talking very loudly, very persuasively, very emotionally, and we can't tell who is a human and who is a robot. This is what has been happening over the last 10, 15 years, and the result is that the conversation is breaking down. And again, this is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It is happening all over the world, leading more and more to the rise of dictatorships, because dictatorships don't need conversations. Again, there is one person dictating everything.
Well, let's push on that assumption for a second. So I could have a different metaphor, which is not a bunch of robots enter the conversation, but a bunch of infinitely intelligent aides join me, and they help me sort through the conversation, and they help me prepare for what I'm going to ask. And then not only that, if you look at the last year, obviously Venezuela, tragic example, but we had elections are not the same as democracy, but we'll use them as a proxy for this hypothetical. We had reasonably positive elections, if you're in favor of democracy, in Poland. We had a little bit of progress in Turkey, serious progress in India, in fact, where an illiberal democracy has actually been challenged. We had an extremely smooth election leading to the election of a Jewish woman in Mexico. We had extremely swift and effective, no deepfakes, maybe don't like the outcome of the election in France. Similar election in the United Kingdom. I mean, the world's doing all right on these elections, despite the challenges of social media, AI, everything else.
And it's not that it's already a done deal. It's not that democracy has collapsed. But if you look at the health of democracies today compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, at least the momentum is very worrying. And again, it's not, I don't think, what really surprises me when I look at the examples from around the world is that it's not about some huge ideological gaps. Actually, the ideological gaps between the different camps today in a place like the US are much smaller than 50 years ago. What worries is the kind of temperature of the argument, and again, this inability to have a reasoned debate, to have a reasoned conversation. Simply having elections is important, but it is not enough. Elections are not democracy. And even in some of the examples you mentioned, so it's not about who wins, which 51% win in the end. It's about the relation between the 51% and the 49%. And democracy shouldn't feel like every election is a life and death struggle, that if we lose this, it might collapse. And even more so, it shouldn't feel like a war between enemies. If a country reaches a situation when people view their political rivals as enemies, then democracy cannot survive for long, because then every election, again, it's like a war. You do anything to win. If you lose, you have no incentive to accept the verdict. If you win, you only take care of your tribe. What is happening in this situation, that a nation breaks down into tribes, leading eventually either to tribal warfare and civil war or to dictatorship. I think that the key thing here also has to do not just with democracy, but also with nationalism and with the breakdown of national communities. That many people think that democracy and nationalism, or democracy and patriotism, are somehow opposites, but they go together, they must go together. Democracy functions well only when there is a national community, only when you feel that you really care about the other people in your country and that they really care about you. If a nation reaches a point when there is no longer a nation, there are warring tribes, and each tribe cares only about itself, then it's only a question of time before democracy collapses. And this is really the worrying trend that we see in many places around the world, irrespective of the results of the latest elections here or there. And this, again, it goes back to the type of communication between people. Can we, for instance, listen to people with different views from our own without thinking that they are enemies?
I learned in the green room that one of the ways that Yuval avoids arguing with bots on Twitter is that he, as he says, is he's stuck in the 90s and uses email and the telephone. Let me ask you a question then. All right, so we're headed into this age. I will certainly agree that democracy is at risk, and I will certainly agree it is at risk for the reasons you give, and I will certainly agree that we will soon have extremely powerful AI algorithms that will underlie a lot of the decisions we make and a lot of the thinking that goes on in our own heads. In a very important section in the book, you lay out 4 values that you think should be embedded in AI systems. And they are benevolence, right? AI systems should be benevolent, seems reasonable. Decentralized, mutuality, you should understand about it, what it understands about you, and the ability to evolve, much as you said about the US Constitution versus the 10 Commandments. So a question for you, what happens when some of these come into conflict with each other, right? So when I read that section, I thought, well, benevolence kind of is in tension with decentralization, because if you decentralize these algorithms, then suddenly you have all kinds of algorithms, you have all kinds of options, you have all kinds of different companies, some of which will be benevolent as you define it, some will not be benevolent as you define it. Well, how is one supposed to weigh these 4 principles for designing future AI systems? Because weighing them correctly seems pretty important to getting the world you want.
Yeah, with benevolence, I mean something very, very narrow, and something we've known for centuries. Simply that if you get hold of my information, you should use it for my benefit and not in order to manipulate me. Which is a basic principle that we already have with our doctors and our lawyers and our accountants and our therapists, and it should be no different with the people who provide us with digital services like social media or like email. Like my personal physician...
But pause for a second. Facebook would not have said it's manipulating us even when in the sort of the heyday of its algorithm. It would have said it's giving us what we want.
That's one way of putting it. And the Facebook algorithm has enormous power over us. And Facebook's business model, and the business model of most of these social media companies, it is based on increasing user engagement. And engagement sounds like a nice thing, but who doesn't want to be engaged? But for them, for the companies, it means that we need to spend more time on the platform, because the more time I spend on it, the more money they make, either by showing me advertisements and commercials, or by collecting my data and then giving it or selling it to third parties. And whether this is what I want or not, that's a very big question. Do I really want to spend more and more time on the platform? Now, what their algorithms do is, by trial and error, they find my weaknesses, and they use my weaknesses to keep me glued to the screen for longer. This is the basic idea of hacking. How do you hack a smartphone or a computer or a program? You look for the weaknesses in the code. It's the same with human beings. This is how you hack human beings. You use these algorithms to find the weaknesses in our code. Each person with their own weaknesses. It's not one size fits all. What makes me angry? What do I already hate? What do I already fear? Or what I'm greedy for? And they give me more and more and more of that. It's like, the food companies that learn that if you pump something full of sugar and fat and salt, people would want more of it. Now, is it really good for us or not? Again, there is a question here. It's not an easy thing to solve, but this is the key of the dilemma, the key of the discussion. And again, the main message is that ultimately it should not be about the profits of the corporation, but whether consuming all this information is really good for me or not. And one last point, I think, like in the example of food, we've reached a point when I think most people need an information diet. That this simplistic idea that more information is always good for us is simply wrong, the same way that more food is not always good for us.
Well, that's why everybody should subscribe to The Atlantic. Let me give you a thought experiment. Because part of what I think is going to, for your system to come down and to work, it's going to depend a little bit on who defines benevolence and who defines these values. And so I want to give you a thought experiment from a conversation I had at a bar not long ago. So I met somebody. I'm going to change some of the details because I can't reveal who they are and what exactly they do. But it was an engineer who works in AI, and they make algorithms. And their current job is that they work for the state of Texas, and they're in charge of the sentencing algorithm. And so they're in charge of an AI algorithm that will determine how long somebody who's guilty will be sent to prison. And so they have hard tasks, right? They have to make sure any algorithm that is trained on historical data will have the biases of that historical data. So you train a sentencing algorithm on historic Texas data, it will be racist, so you have to control for that. You may let the women out sooner, you have to make sure that's proper and right. And you go back through and you control through it and you try to fix that. And so we're having a long conversation and I'm asking her, well, how do you control for this and how do you control for that and how do you control for this? And eventually she says, you know what I do, Nick? She said, I've rigged the algorithm. And I've rigged it in such a way that everybody will be sentenced for much less time than the state of Texas did before. And I've done it in such a way the state of Texas will never figure out that I've done that. Is that something that an AI engineer should be doing?
That's extremely dangerous. Because
extremely dangerous, but it may be a value that many liberals agree with, and they feel like conservative states have sentenced people for too long. So it's embedding a value that that person feels is benevolent into a system and leading to what they believe is justice.
At the very least, when we are talking about, the law of a country, this should be left to the citizens and to the voters,
well, it has
and not to the, a dictatorship of an engineer.
Well, they've given the power to hire whatever contractor they want to the state. They've elected, the governor of the state of Texas, and they've hired this person. The state is not Texas where this is happening, so don't Google sentencing algorithm. It's a different thing in a different place. You won't be able to figure it out, but it's the same example.
I think that the key point that is raised by this example is the issue of unfathomability. To what extent we can still understand the systems that control our lives.
Yeah.
When I get this question a lot of what really frightens me about AI. And you have these kind of Hollywood science fiction scenarios of the big robot rebellion, and the robots are rebelling and coming to kill us, and this is unlikely to happen anytime soon. But what is already happening, this is not a science fiction scenario for the future. What is already happening is that we basically have millions of AI bureaucrats, millions of bureaucratic algorithms making more and more decisions about our life. We apply to a bank to get a loan, it's an AI deciding. We committed a crime, they send us to prison, it's increasingly an AI deciding for how long. And this could rise to the level of key economic and financial decisions about what would be the rate of interest of the Federal Reserve. This could increasingly be a decision made by AIs and not human beings. And there are many good reasons why to give this kind of power to AIs. But what happened down the road when eventually so many of these crucial decisions about us are made in a way that we simply cannot understand. We don't know why the bank refused us a loan. We don't know why they sent us to 5 years and not 4 years or 6 years in prison. We don't know why the interest rate is 4% and not 3%. And we don't know, not because somebody's hiding it from us, simply because it's far too complicated for the human brain. That the advantage of AI, the good side of AI, that it can analyze much more data than any human brain, find patterns that we can't, deal with mathematical complexities which are way beyond what we can deal with. But the downside of all that is what is the meaning, for instance, of democracy? If increasingly all the decisions, or at least many of the decisions, are made in a way which are not transparent and therefore not accountable to human beings.
Let's go through another one, which is somewhat similar. So one of the companies that makes AI systems is Anthropic. And they use this system called constitutional AI as they choose how they write their prompts and how they structure their algorithm, which is probably the closest of the major AI companies to, as I understand it, the philosophy of Yuval Harari. And so when it gives an answer, it checks whether the answer would abide by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? It actually follows like the US Constitution, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and Apple's terms of service. It's very funny. But in any event, the biggest problem that they have and the other AI companies is they don't know, just as you said, they don't know why things make decisions. And so they've been trying to understand what's called interpretability. And so they went in and they said, well, let's see what happens if we go into all of our training data and we add a little extra weight to everything that has to do with the Golden Gate Bridge. So if there's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a mention of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a box score about the San Francisco Giants, we'll weigh that a little more than one about the Philadelphia Phillies. They do all that, and then they ask Claude, tell me a love story. And naturally, the love story takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge, right? If you mess with the training data and the weights, you get some of these interesting outcomes. So then the question for you would be, if we can do this, why not go into the AI and not weight it towards the Golden Gate Bridge, but weight it towards love, compassion, benevolence? Is that a good idea?
I'm not sure what it means in a technical sense, but when I look at human history, I know that quite often in history, people talk about love, or they start with love, and very quickly they get to hate and to war. The Christianity, which sees itself, and going back to the Council of Carthage, sees itself as the religion of love, that it's all about love, was responsible for more violence than any other religion or ideology in history. And they somehow found a way how, out of love, we wage crusades, and we build inquisitions, and we burn heretics at the stake. It's all out of love. And they really believed it.
They also gave us Bach.
But again, the way that I think this often happens is that if you think that you are motivated by love, and if you think that you're trying to build utopia, whoever stands in your way must be demonic. Whoever stands in your way must be evil. The more good I am, then any opposition is by definition, it's not just somebody who thinks differently, but they are evil. Now again, I'm not sure how to translate that into AI speak, but again, one of the lessons from history is that just thinking that because we have these kind of good weights, we've weighted our holy book, we've weighted the code in favor of love. Anything that has love, it got extra. Anything that has compassion, it got extra. And somehow from that you get the Inquisition. So if it happens with humans, I would also be very worried about AI. But what we need, the basic thing that, again, we learn again and again in history is that we need a self-correcting mechanism. We can't trust that just because something has these good values at its basis, what will come out of it will also necessarily be benevolent and compassionate. We saw it again in the modern age with Marxism, which begins with these wonderful ideas of equality and of compassion, and ends with the gulags. And if you're really convinced that you're coming from a good foundation, and also if you think that you're in the process of building utopia, then it gives you an open check to do the most horrible things on the way to utopia. And again, anything that stands in your way is then transformed from political rivalry to kind of demonic possession.
I mean, in some ways, this is one of the scariest things you said, because the people who are building the AI models genuinely do believe they are leading us to utopia, right?
And that's very, very dangerous, because this is what gives them the open check. They say, we are building utopia, so anything that kind of we have to sacrifice on the way is worth it, because when you would look at the bottom line, and this was the basic argument also of people like Lenin and Stalin. Yes, we have to murder these millions of people, but in the end, when we build utopia, real existing socialism here on Earth, it will turn out that it's, these billions who died in the Gulag, this was worth it.
Man, had never thought of the Khmer Rouge at the same time I thought of Anthropic, but here we are. but hold on, Yuval. In the next couple weeks, I think, where were you last? You were last in Toronto. You're probably going to move west, and you're probably going to sit down, and you're going to sit down with all these people because they all read your books, right? There's this famous image of Jeff Bezos, and he's giving this interview, and he's got like 4 books behind him on his bookshelf, and like plants, and and 3 of them are Yuval's, I believe. So you're going to be talking to these folks, and so what you're telling me is that if, say, Dario Modi, the guy who runs Anthropic, is there, he's like, we're trying to figure out what to train on, and I've been thinking we should train it on, we should just train it on sort of positive, uplifting, factual stories. I really don't think we should, train it on everything, which includes like serial killers' diaries. And you're going to say like, no, put the serial killers' diaries in there because, don't just train it on your definition of love. Is that what you're going to argue to him?
No, I mean, I would basically say that I don't know how to train AIs. This is not my field. But no matter what kind of positive basis you give it, and no matter what positive intentions you have, your number one assumption should be that this thing is not infallible. I'm not infallible. There is a high chance for mistakes, and therefore I need to leave room for correction. The most important thing when you build it is build a mechanism for identifying and correcting the mistakes. Again, this is also the advice that I would have gave Lenin in 1917. Like, you're going on this huge experiment, you're thinking that you're building utopia, start with the assumption that you will make mistakes, include in the structure, say, of the Soviet Union, mechanisms for identifying and correcting the mistakes of the system, including the mistakes of Lenin and of whoever is going to succeed you, which is the one thing they didn't do.
Yeah, Lenin should have read *Sapiens*. I have a nice image of him reading it on the train there. All right, let's talk a little bit about cocoons, which is one of the extremely interesting parts of your book. So you make an argument, and you say that there are some fundamental human issues, like the separation of mind and body. You tell the story of Martin Luther. It's actually a way of telling the story of Martin Luther I had not read before. But you argue that what could happen in an age of AI is that you end up with some civilizations that have a totally different understanding of what is the mind and what is the body, and therefore totally different judicial systems. So it's one of the most mind-bending parts of the book. I'd like you to explain this to the audience.
Ooh. So there is a lot of explaining. I'll try to do it short. I mean, first of all, about the cocoons, it's the changing of the metaphors in this age of information revolution. That 30 years ago, the dominant metaphor was the web, the World Wide Web, and the web was supposed to connect everything and everybody. And over the years, the web kind of closed in on us, and now it's the cocoons. That every person or every group is enclosed within an information cocoon, and sometimes, your next door neighbors are in a different cocoon than you, and there is just no way to access from one to the other. And an extreme example of where this can go, like today, people don't agree, like in the United States, about who won the last elections. This can go to a place where people don't agree what a human is, or what a person is, and what are the relations between mind and body. One of the recurrent arguments throughout history that we see in many traditions, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, is what exactly is a human being, and what is the relation between mind and body, or between soul and spirit and body. So if we again go back to the age of the Council of Carthage and early Christianity, so Judaism and the first Christians, which came out of Judaism, they viewed humans as embodied entities. The body was central. We are bodies. The soul, biblical Judaism did not talk at all about the soul. The idea that there could be a soul that exists separately from the body, unheard of in biblical Judaism. It's all about the body. And also the first Christians, they focus on the body. The whole idea originally is that God is incarnated in the flesh. The flesh is at the center, And after Jesus is crucified, he's supposed to come back in the flesh. And the kingdom of God is supposed to be a material kingdom of fleshy bodies on the earth. But eventually, under influences of Platonic philosophies and other influences, and also for practical purposes, because the kingdom of God was nowhere to be seen, and the really big problem for early Christians is that they won. You know, when you're a persecuted minority, a sect, you can have all these promises, okay, when we finally gain power, then we'll have the kingdom of God. And then they have one of the biggest disasters that can happen to any religion, they gain power. They become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, so okay, so where's the kingdom of God? And there is no kingdom of God. You still have the same wars and corruptions and civil wars and executions and human greed, and it's all the same. So they say, okay, the kingdom of God is not on earth. It's on a different level of reality. It's in heaven. And you can't access it in the flesh. After you die, your soul will get to heaven. And many Christians drift towards a very different view of humans, as a dualistic view actually, that my real essence is my soul, which is entrapped in a material, biological, filthy body with all these sexual passions and all these lusts. And the hope, the ideal, is that eventually the soul will be released from this earthly, fleshy prison and get to a purely immaterial realm, which is heaven, where it will exist forever and ever. And throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history, you see this tension. They can never really abandon the body, partly because the Bible is full of it. And again, Christ was incarnated in the body, in the flesh, and rose and came back to life in the flesh. And there is very little about this immaterial realm of pure souls in the Bible itself. It all mostly came later. So there is this constant arguments that often leads to blows and to wars of religion. And in the early century of the church, one of the biggest arguments was about the nature of Jesus Christ himself, with one camp saying that he was entirely a human, made of flesh, another camp saying that he was entirely divine and non-material, a spiritual being, and there was a third camp who said that he was non-binary. And the non-binaries won. This was the eventually official doctrine of the church. He is non-binary. He's both and none at the same time. But huge arguments and also violence around these issues. Now, how does all this relate to AI? We are going to have another round of this mind-body debate. We are already in the midst of it. What is your identity? What defines your identity? Is your identity defined by your biological body? Or is your identity defined by what you believe about yourself, by your faith? You know, people like Martin Luther, they said sola fide. The only thing that matters is what you believe. And we are now living in a kind of new round of this debate, with some people say, if you go online, you can be whatever you want. The biological body sitting in front of the screen should not limit the identities that you can adopt. Other people say, no, there is a biological body. This is the center of your identity. You cannot ignore your biological body. And as everybody knows, this is a very heated debate right now. And this also potentially will influence how we treat AIs. AIs have no bodies, but they will increasingly be able to interact with us and to press our emotional buttons and even to pretend to have emotions of themselves. Now, people who give primacy to the body in the identity of a person will resist treating AIs as persons. People who think that identity has little to do with biology will have a much easier time giving or treating AIs as persons, even though they have no bodies. And different countries can go different ways. So, you know, arguments about human rights today between, say, United States and China, think what it means in 50 years when you perhaps have billions of entities which are considered persons with rights in one country, but another country doesn't recognize them as persons at all because they have no biological body. And at least in the US, interestingly enough, there is already a completely open legal path to recognizing non-humans devoid of bodies as legal persons with rights. Because corporations, according to US law, are legal persons that has, for instance, freedom of speech, according to the Supreme Court since at least 2010. Now, at present, this is a legal fiction, because all the decisions of corporations are made by human beings with biological bodies. So Google, according to US law, is a legal person, but at present, all the decisions of Google have to be made by some human being. But what happens, in a few years maybe, when you start incorporating AIs as legal persons? You can technically incorporate an AI as a corporation, let's call it Google. And the interesting thing about Google is that it doesn't need any human employees to make its decisions for it. This is what the AI can do it by itself. So the AI, for instance, can open a bank account and can start earning money. It can go on TaskRabbit or Mechanical Turk online and offer its services to people or corporations and earn money, and then it has money. And then it can start investing its money in the stock exchange. And if it's a very intelligent AI, it could potentially become the richest person in the US. So think about a situation when the richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And again, according to US law, as far as I understand, one of the rights reserved for this non-human person is freedom of speech, which manifests itself, among other things, in making political contributions. So this AI could donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for giving even more rights to AI. So these are the kinds of science fiction scenarios I think that we should be more concerned with than the Great Robot Rebellion.
If a senior AI bot starts to hit on a junior AI bot in this corporation, what should the AI HR department... Okay. We have a bunch of flesh and blood bodies here who have to go get pizza and beer. So I'm going to ask just one more question about the apocalypse, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So I was reading your book on the subway. I was wrapping it up before dinner the other night with my son, and this was my favorite paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you, and I want you to explain what it means. We have now created a non-conscious, but very powerful alien intelligence. Agreed. If we mishandle it, AI might extinguish not only the human dominion on Earth, but the light of consciousness itself, turning the universe into a realm of utter darkness. Very cheerful book here, Yuval. This is the end. It is our responsibility to prevent this. So one way to prevent it would be to prevent AI from extinguishing us. Another would be to try to create consciousness and send it out into the universe. Explain to me, the question that this paragraph raises is, what is the thing that humans could do that would allow consciousness to exist even if we extinguish ourselves?
Oh, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, the problem is we still don't understand consciousness. We don't know how it emerges in us. We don't know how it evolved. That's why we also, with regard to AI, this big question of AI consciousness, I tend to be agnostic about it. I don't think that AIs will necessarily develop consciousness, but I'm not sure that they will never develop consciousness. That could be. So again, this scenario that AIs destroy human civilization, take over, and maybe spread from Earth to the rest of the galaxy and to other galaxies, but in the process they never develop consciousness. This is the dark universe scenario. That, again, that there is huge confusion about these two terms because in humans they go together. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals and solve problems on the way to that goal. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Humans solve problems relying on our feelings. In us and in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. This is why we confuse them. Now, in computers, so far, we've only seen an advance, a huge advance in intelligence, without any advance in consciousness as far as we can tell. In some fields, narrow fields, AI is already far more intelligent than us, and still it has no consciousness. When it wins the game of chess, it's not happy. When it loses, it's not sad. It doesn't feel anything. Now, in many scenarios, as AI becomes more and more intelligent, at some point, it also gains consciousness. But there is no reason to think that this is inevitable. There could be different roads leading to super intelligence. Mammals and humans have been traveling along one road for millions and millions of years, a road which involves the development of consciousness. Computers, AIs, might simply be traveling along a different road, a much faster road, which reaches superintelligence without passing through any phase of developing consciousness. And if this happens, and if it gets out of our control, this could spell, again, not just the end of the human dominion on Earth, but the end of the light of consciousness itself. You can have a galactic empire without any feeling, and nothing feels anything. It's just all dark.
But why is that? Explain to me why that is so much a worse outcome than just the obliteration of humans, which is a plenty bad outcome.
There are other entities, conscious entities in the world right now. There are other animals. There is no reason to think that, in the history of billions of years of life, that sapiens is definitely the last station. Whether through biological evolution or whether through some kind of combination with AI, it's very likely that if we survive, I don't think that humans like us will still be here in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. The technology will be so advanced that there will be sentient beings, but they will have completely different bodies and minds, completely different experiences. And this is not necessarily bad. The same way that, the fact that we are here and the first human species that existed 2 million years ago are gone, we don't think about it as a tragedy. And most people, at least with regard to their children, they hope that their children will be, at least in some way, a bit more evolved than them. But to think that this will be completely wiped out, that there will still be intelligence, but no consciousness at all. I think that intelligence is really overrated. The really important thing in life is consciousness. It's not intelligence. Intelligence enables us to do different things, but ultimately, it's all about consciousness.
You know who's still going to be there, Yuval? These guys. Pigeons are going to be there, and they're going to speak thousands of languages. All right, let's go to some audience questions. In your last book, this is from Martin Gallardo, in Homo Deus, you began your book by arguing that humanity has, quote, has almost defeated, quote, hunger, plagues, and war. Do you still stand for that idea, or have you reconsidered your argument?
I think humanity has the capacity to rein in famine, plague, and war, but it depends whether we actually do it, depends on our decisions, and we have been making some terrible decisions over the last 10 years, which is why we are seeing the return of these calamities, of these conditions. We are now on the verge of a third world war, which, if it happens, is also likely to be accompanied by famine and potentially by plague. And the key thing to understand is that the decline, for instance, of war in recent generations was not the result of a change in the laws of nature. It was not some divine miracle. It was simply humans making good decisions and building good institutions. And if we start making bad decisions and neglecting the institutions that preserved peace, then war returns.
This question is from Hamad Alavi. There is growing concern regarding the impact of AI on employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs and low-income communities. Considering the rapid advancements and uncertainties associated with AI, what strategies or measures can be implemented to alleviate these negative effects?
The safest thing is to slow down. I think that humans and human societies are extremely adaptable, but in order to adapt, you need time. So, you know, if 10% or 20% of people suddenly lose their jobs, this is a huge political crisis. If it's kind of more drawn out over several years, we have time to adapt. And the most important thing is what happens on the global level. Because when I look at the country like the United States, for instance, I'm not so worried. I mean, you know, many jobs will disappear in the coming decade or two. Other jobs will emerge. The big question is whether people will be able to retrain themselves to fill the new jobs. And for that, they will need support. And the countries that lead the AI revolution, they will have immense resources to support the retraining of the population and also to support those members of society that will not be able to go through the transition. The big problem will be in other countries that might face complete economic collapse and will just not have the resources to retrain their workforce and to adapt to the new AI economy.
What do you think of the premise of the question that AI will affect employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs in low-income communities? People argue both sides of that.
I'm not sure. There are good reasons to think it will definitely impact also kind of high-income jobs, accountants, lawyers, doctors, coders, engineers. There is no reason to think that it will focus specifically on low-income jobs.
I think it's probably going to wipe out media CEOs and historians first. This is from Mike Sexton. My favorite thing about your historical writing is that it has implications not just for how we live, but how we should live. If you were a lifestyle guru instead, what message or recommendations would you have for your audience?
I'm not a lifestyle guru, so I don't know.
As most of you know, this man meditates 2 hours a day, takes a month-long retreat. You are a lifestyle guru.
Yeah, but I don't tell all people to do it. I know that, you know, it works for me, but I know it doesn't work for other people. You know, if for somebody else, it's better to, you know, take a hike in the woods, so do that instead. The idea that, you know, meditation works for me, so it must work for all people, it's not.
Yeah, I tried a month-long silent retreat and didn't work for my employees and my 3 kids. How do you think AI and disinformation will impact minority rights, especially for those in the LGBTQ+ community?
Ooh. Again, it depends on our decisions. It's not deterministic. It can work both ways. For my own life, I know that, you know, the internet and social media has been wonderful in many ways to the LGBTQ community. I met my husband 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel, which was, again, it was really a revolution. Because if you think about minorities in history, there are 2 types of minorities. You have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. And concentrated minorities, you think like, you know, Jewish communities. So if you're born a Jew, let's say in Europe in the Middle Ages, There aren't many Jews around, but you're surrounded by them. You're born into a Jewish family, in a Jewish neighborhood, in a Jewish ghetto, in a Jewish community. You know lots of Jews. So you have no problem finding other Jews. But for instance, I was born in Israel in the 1970s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a very homophobic society. And I wasn't born in Tel Aviv. I was born in a small suburb of Haifa. And I didn't know anybody who was gay. And this is a dispersed minority. Most gay boys are not born to a gay family in a gay community. Sometimes it happens, but it's very rare. So the first question you encounter is, how do I find the others? Again, a question that Jews don't have to deal with, but gay people had to deal with throughout history. And then the internet came along, and to a large extent solved the problem. That suddenly it became very easy, or at least much easier than before, to find each other. So, I often criticize, and in the book there is a lot of criticism of information technology and social media, but they also have enormous positive potential.
Could extinguish the light of the universe, but good for the gays. All right. Thank you. If you could resurrect one other species of human that is now extinct, which one would you bring back and for what purpose?
I think it will be very bad for them. I mean, the way that our species treat ourselves, just because we have a little bit of different language or skin color, I wouldn't like to be a Neanderthal minority or Denisova minority in a sapiens world.
Should AI be raised with human parents along a curated, this is from Kathleen Landers, along a curated developmental trajectory to create a sense of love and attachment and connection on the assumption that it's possible to instill a moral code in the way one is created by humans, we should try?
AIs are not organic. I mean, they function along a completely different, in completely different ways. They are not, I don't know, chimpanzees or Neanderthals that you can think, okay, I'll raise a chimpanzee in a human family so it will become human-like. And this is a key kind of misconception we often have about AI. Like you have all these people asking, when will AI reach human-level intelligence? The answer is never. It's not on the path to human-level intelligence. It's not human, it's not even organic. I mean, for me, the acronym AI traditionally stood for artificial intelligence. I think it should stand for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense of coming from outer space, alien in the sense that, yes, this is intelligence, but it makes decisions, it processes information, it invents ideas in a fundamentally alien way. Again, it's not organic. One very important thing is that organic beings, we work by cycles. Day and night, winter and summer, growth and decay, and sometimes we're active, sometimes we need to rest. One of the problems we encounter more and more in the world is that now the world is increasingly run by these non-organic intelligences that never need to rest, and they don't have cycles, and they pressure us to be the same. Instead of them becoming like us, they pressure us to be the same. And if you force an organic being to be on all the time, to be active all the time, eventually it just collapses and dies. You think even about something like the financial system. So traditionally, the financial system is an organic system which sometimes take breaks. Wall Street the market is open only, I think, Monday to Friday, 9:30 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's it. Weekend, it's off. Christmas, it's off. And this is good for human beings. But if you give AIs greater control of finance, then the system is always on, and this puts pressure on human financiers and bankers to be always on, which is just humanly impossible. And the same thing is happening to journalists, and the same thing is happening to politicians, which consequently collapse. And I often say that the most misunderstood word in the English language, at least in the United States, is the word excited. That people overuse it as a good thing. Like they meet you and they say, oh, I'm so excited to meet you. You publish a book, oh, this is so exciting. And they think that excited means happy, but it doesn't. Excited means that like your nervous system and your brain is fully on. And if you could keep the nervous system of an organic entity on all the time, it leads to collapse. So the whole system is far too excited. We need to relax. Like we meet each other, I'm so relaxed to be here with you today. And not excited at all. And just think how good it would be if politics was less exciting. Like, what we need, I think, above all in politics is boring politicians. Like, I would say, vote for boring politicians.
All right, well, I am so relaxed to ask the very last question of the night, Yuval. This is from Misha. Do you think that future reliance on artificial intelligence will impact and compete with religion as a source of spirituality?
Could be, quite likely. I think that, many religions have always fantasized about having access to a superhuman intelligence. And suddenly we have it. Think about texts, about holy texts. The idea of the holy text is that this is coming from a non-human intelligence which is superior to us. Now, the problem with holy texts throughout human history until today was that they couldn't really talk back to us. Like, there was something in the text we couldn't understand, and the text could not explain itself. Like, what is the correct interpretation of this passage in Scripture? So you always, even though in theory, the highest authority in the religion was the holy text, in practice, a human institution grew around the holy text. And the real authority was in the hands of the people who interpreted the text. And the same way that you have today this fight in the tech world between people who believe in open source and people who believe that no, it should be closed and just a couple of experts will. This was the same with Catholics and Protestants. Like the Catholics say, no, you have the experts of the church, they should interpret the Holy Code. And you have the Protestants who believe in open source. Anybody can read the code and interpret it by themselves. But what happens when for the first time in history the text can talk back? Whether the text of the traditional holy books, you can train an AI to read every single treatise written by every theologian or bishop or thinker in the 3rd century or in 11th century Byzantium, and that AI will understand the texts of Christianity better than any human being. Would it be more authoritative than human theologians and bishops? One big question. The other question, what happens if you have new religions with texts written by a non-human intelligence? And this can already happening right now. With AIs maybe disseminating a new holy text online, which creates the kernel for the next big religion, which will have, again, a text that can talk back, coming from a superhuman, non-human intelligence. So I definitely think that some of the most interesting developments in AI will be in the field of theology and religion. And maybe it's and with a recommendation that Google and Microsoft, they should hire a few theologians because they will need it.
All right, that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much to Politics and Prose. Thank you so much to the theater. And thank you most of all to Yuval Noah Harari.
Please welcome Yuval Noah Harari and Sir Stephen Fry.
Goodness me, I wasn't sure anyone would turn up. Isn't this rather exciting? Well, it's a great thrill for me to be with this hero of mine, really, Yuval Noah Harari. I'm sure many of you will have read the book that catapulted his name into world fame, Sapiens, a remarkable history of our species, which involved many, many extraordinary insights and a kind of thrilling narrative of its own. But one of the things Yuval, that I think many of us were impressed by was the way you showed that perhaps Sapiens was almost the wrong title. It wasn't that we were the wise humanity, but that we were storytelling humanity. That what separated us from the Neanderthals and from other primates and set us on our course was the fact that we told stories about ourselves and about the world as we apprehended it. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And would you say that this is both what gets us into trouble, because a story is also another word for a lie, and also what propels us into a stable future?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword in this regard, which becomes particularly important in the age of AI, because for the first time in history, we encounter a better storyteller than we are. We took over the planet not because we are more intelligent than the other animals, but because we can cooperate better. And we cooperate through storytelling. And you have the obvious examples like religions, but my favorite example is money, which is probably the greatest story ever invented, ever told, because it's the only one everybody believes, or almost everybody. I mean, humans. No other animal on the planet knows that money even exists, because it only exists in our imagination. But now there is another thing on the planet that knows that money exists, and that can maybe invent new kinds of money and new kinds of other stories. And what will happen to us when we have to deal, it's not just with one better storyteller, but with billions of better storytellers than us on this planet. That's, I think, one of the biggest questions of our age.
Yes, and you're talking, of course, about AI, and it's recently come to light that one of the large language model corporations, Anthropic, has revealed that its latest instance of Claude was, in a closed test, was seen to blackmail some people in order to achieve a goal. And when we think about AI, we either get very dismissive of it. It's merely a parrot repeating probable instances of human communication, a stochastic parrot, as Emily Bender, the computational linguist, famously called it. It's every time it gives you a sentence, no matter how intelligent it appears, it is merely following a probabilistic route.
The question is it not the same with us?
Yeah, exactly.
When I look at the way sentences are formed in my own mind, like now when I'm talking with you, I don't know how the sentence will end. Yeah. I start saying something, and the words just keep bubbling up in the mind. And as a public speaker, it's something terrifying, because I don't know if I will be able to complete the sentence. I'm not sure what will be the next word.
That's right. You're talking and you're trying to make sense, and suddenly you've come up with lettuce. Where did that happen? It's an unrolling carpet. Syntagmatic, I think, is the technical word for it.
And the amazing thing with AI, you can now ask the AI to show you exactly how it thinks. You can actually watch how the logic unfolds in the AI in a way which is very difficult for us to do with our own minds. But we can now do, the AIs don't have minds, at least as far as we know, but we can see how the sentences, the stories are being formed in their, whatever we call it.
If we ask them to, but the fact is I've spoken to people like Jeffrey Hinton and people who are called the godfather of AI, and they would say that the most disturbing fact about these current models is that nobody knows what's going on under the hood. They don't actually know how it's doing what it's doing.
If we could know everything that's going on there and predict it, it wouldn't be AI.
That's the point. Exactly.
If you have something that you can predict how it will behave, what decisions it will make,
what ideas it will invent. By definition, this is not AI. This
Yes.
is just an automatic machine.
The way to make that clearer, perhaps, is to recognize that AI now can beat, just on your phone, any chess player in the world. And you obviously can't predict the moves it's going to make, because if you could predict the moves it was going to make, you would beat it, or it would be a stalemate every time. And you expand that to the whole of AI. You don't know what it's going to say or do, which is why it's a useful tool. If it could only match what we did, it would be not a tool. It would be like saying that a digger, a JCB, could only dig as much as a human with a spade. The point is we have these machines to outmatch what we can do, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's the main point. Both the main premise of AI is to be better than us at decision-making in many fields, that it would be able to invent things that we cannot think about, but that is also the main threat.
Yeah.
That we cannot predict how it will behave, and we cannot control it in advance, no matter how much we try to make it safe, to align it with our aims, with our goals. I think it really goes to the heart of what AI is.
Yes.
That usually we think about AI as an acronym for artificial intelligence. But it's no longer artificial. Yeah. If you think about what an artifact is something that we create and we control. Yep. With each passing day, AI is becoming less and less artificial, which is why I prefer to think about AI as an acronym for alien intelligence. Yeah. It is, even the word, in a way, a true intelligence is never an artifact. Because an artifact is something that you create and control, whereas intelligence is characterized by the ability to create new things.
Yeah. You used a verb there very quickly, but it's worth expanding on it, and that was align. And for those of us who are concerned, shall we say, about how AI is going, one of the main problems is what is known as the alignment problem. There's a simple way of looking at it, which is an old philosophical thought experiment called the genie. So if you imagine a genie who gives you a wish, and you love life and you're an empathetic person, so you say to the genie, can you really bring any wish true? And they say, yes. You say, in that case, could you end all suffering? And instantly, all life on the planet is extinguished. Because to the genie, they look at the world, and all suffering comes in form of life. All forms of life suffer. Smallest animals and us. That's the only place where suffering exists. Stones, as far as the genie is concerned, don't suffer. Maybe trees do, it's not sure, but if it gets rid of all life, it has solved our problem, and it bows and says, there you are, master. Now, that's a very broad sense of the alignment problem. We asked a very stupid question. We didn't think it through. But the fact is, yes, we have to understand AI and alien, but we really have to understand ourselves in order, because we don't have shared ethical frameworks around the world. How do you encode dignity, love, sympathy, passion, joy, equality? We've only just learned, if you like, recently that women's and men's lives and dignities are equal and that people of different races are equal. We've only just discovered this. And there are many other things we aren't sure about. And how, therefore, can we expect the machines to be sure? And therefore, we ask them a question, and it might do an equivalent of what the genie does. How do you see a solution to that?
Well, one of the other key things about AI, because it can learn and change by itself, so whatever we teach it, we cannot be certain that it will always just comply by our instructions. Again, if it only does what we tell it to do, it's not really an AI. So when we think about the alignment problem, or how to educate AI to be benevolent and not harmful, it's a very problematic and imperfect analogy, but I think it's still useful to think about AI as a child, as the child of humanity. And what we know about educating children is that they never do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you do. Yeah. If you tell a child, don't lie, and then the child observes you lying and cheating other people, it will copy your behavior, not follow your instructions. Now, if we have, the kind of people who are leading the AI revolution, telling the AI, don't lie, but the AI observes them, observes the world, and sees them lying and cheating and manipulating, it will do the same. Yeah. I mean, if AI is developed not through a cooperative effort of humans who trust each other, but it is developed through an arms race, a competition. So again, you can tell the AI as much as you like to be compassionate and to be benevolent, but if it observes the world, because AI learns from observation. Yes. Yeah. If it observes the world, or it observes how humans behave towards each other, it observes how its own creators behave. And if they are ruthless, power-hungry competitors, it will also be ruthless and power-hungry. You cannot create a compassionate and trustworthy AI through an arms race. It just won't happen.
Well, yes, Yuval, you've said this. If you had said this in 1980 during what was known as the AI winter, we'd say, yes, we must plan and make sure this isn't happening. But it's already happening. There is an arms race. The very people who are spending the billions and billions are the same people, for example, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, who gave us the disaster of Facebook and social media and what it has done to the polity of the world and to the poverty of the world, to essentially, in this country, as we know, the rivers are polluted and contaminated. You wouldn't swim in any river in Britain because there's raw sewage being poured into it. Well, our children are breathing a cultural river, which is similarly polluted and contaminated. And we all know this, and Facebook knows this, and Twitter and X know this, but they do nothing about it. And if you even mention guardrails and regulation, they scream communism. And Trump has just announced that he will ban individual states in America from regulating AI. There is an arms race. So everything you said is happening. So how can we come together to stop AI in the hands of corporate greed and national greed in this arms race, whether it's China against America or it's one company against another? It's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's moving very fast, partly because there is also enormous positive potential, of course. In everything from healthcare to tackling the climate emergency. Yes. So we have to acknowledge there is also this enormous positive potential. The question is not how to stop the development of AI, it's how to make sure that it is used for good. And here, I think that the main problem is simply an issue of priority, of what comes first. Humanity now faces two major challenges. On the one hand, we have the challenge of developing a super intelligent AI. On the other hand, we have the challenge of how to rebuild trust between humans, because trust all over the world, both between countries and also within countries, is collapsing. Nobody is absolutely certain why it's happening, but everybody is able to observe it. I mean, maybe the last thing that, let's say, Republicans and Democrats in the US can agree on is that trust is collapsing.
Yes.
It's that they don't trust each other. They don't agree on any fact except that they don't trust each other.
So this is the worst possible time for us to come together. We no longer believe in global institutions like the United Nations, the WHO.
Even in national institutions.
Yes.
I mean, one of the explanations for the collapse of trust is that over thousands of years, humans have been amazing in building despite all the conflicts and tensions and so forth, 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of hunter-gatherers and could not trust anybody outside their band of 50 or 100 individuals. Now we have nations of hundreds of millions of people. We have a global trade network, a global scientific network with billions of people. So we are obviously quite good at building trust. Yeah. But over thousands of years, we have built trust through human communication. And now, within almost every relationship, there is a machine, an algorithm, an AI in between. And we see a collapse of trust in humans, whereas there is a rise of trust in algorithms and AIs. Again, I mentioned money as the greatest story ever told. So you see that people are losing trust in human-made money, like euros and dollars and pounds, but they shift the trust
from fiat to
cryptocurrencies and to an algorithm-based money. So we have these two problems of the developing AI and rebuilding trust between humans. And the question is which one we solve first, which is the priority. Now, unfortunately, you hear some of the smartest people in the world, they say, first we solve the AI problem, and then with the help of AI, we'll solve the trust problem. And I think this is a very bad idea. If we develop AI through an arms race between humans who can't trust each other, there is absolutely no reason to expect that we'll be able to trust the AIs. I mean, the big paradox is that when you talk with people like Mark Zuckerberg, like Elon Musk, they often say openly that they are also afraid of the dangerous potential of AI. They are not blind to it, they are not oblivious to it, but they say that they are caught in this arms race, that if I slow down, my competitors will not slow down, I can't trust them, so I must move faster. But then you ask them, okay, so you can't trust your human competitors. Do you think you'll be able to trust this super intelligent alien intelligence you're developing? And the same people who just told you they can't trust other humans tell you, oh, but I think we'll be able to trust the alien AIs, which is almost insane. So the right order of doing it is first solve the human trust problem, then together, in a cooperative way, we can develop and educate trustworthy AIs. But unfortunately, we are doing the exact opposite.
Yes. And there's, as you know, there's been for decades the doomsday clock, which the nuclear scientists set midnight is Armageddon, the end of everything. And it's been roughly at 89 seconds to midnight for the last few years. It's crept up over recent days for obvious reasons. But there's another metric that I've been studying recently called P-doom. It's the letter P, which is probability, brackets, doom, close brackets. It's one used by people in the business, the scientists in AI. So, for example, Alicia Yudkowsky, who's the founder of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute in California, sets P at 90. That's to say, a 90% chance of human extinction through AI. Jan LeCun, who is the chief scientist for Meta, sets it at 0. But then he is the chief scientist for Meta. So that's like a tobacco executive saying, cancer? No chance. What are you talking about? Can't possibly happen. But so I've worked out that roughly the lowest median is between 7.5% and 10% of human catastrophe of an extinction order through AI, if things are not controlled in the way you say they should be. Now, the chance of winning the lottery in this country is 0.0000022%. So what you're saying here is that the chance of human extinction at 7.5%, which is the lowest really amongst the current important scientists, Nobel Prize winners like Hinton and Hassabis. 7.5% is 3.4 million times greater than 0.00022%. So if I were to give you a lottery ticket and say this is a valid lottery ticket, the only difference is you are 3.4 million times more likely to win, you would take it. And that's the odds we're playing with at a low rate. So let's look at the bad side of things. As we've said, we're going about it in the wrong order, as you've put it. Most people who understand the science say there is a very severe chance that humanity will be extinguished by this, a greater chance than by nuclear Armageddon, in fact, or indeed climate change. And humans are not in a position at the moment to trust each other and to establish guardrails, to agree on how we should go forward. So do you have a solution for us, Yuval? I'm almost on my knees begging you at this point. I don't have children, so I can almost say I don't care. But I have lots of godchildren, and I have lots of great nieces and great nephews, so I do care about what happens to our planet. And I'm sure you do too.
Again, I think that it's very dangerous to think too much about, kind of doomsday and extinction scenarios. They cause people to despair. We do have what it takes to manage this revolution because we are creating it. This is not the dinosaurs being extinguished by an asteroid coming from outer space that they have no way of even understanding, let alone controlling. This is a process which, at least for now, is under human control. In 5 years, in 10 years, we will have millions and even billions of AI agents taking more and more decisions, inventing more and more ideas. It will be a hybrid society. So it will become more difficult, but we need to start with the realization that this is a completely human-made danger. We have everything we need in order to manage it. The main missing ingredient is trust between human beings. And again, over tens of thousands of years, we have demonstrated that we are capable of building trust, even on a global level. Yes. So it's not beyond our capabilities. And it then goes back, to the old questions of politics and ethics, of how do you build trust between human beings. And we need to think also about more kind of concrete and immediate questions. One of the biggest questions we will be facing in the next few years is how to deal with these new AI agents.
Yes.
Do we consider them as persons? More and more people are entering relationships, personal relationships with AIs. More and more corporations and armies are giving AIs control, agency over important decisions. This is not some kind of philosophical question.
No,
it's a
real.
Completely should AIs have the ability to open a bank account and manage a bank account? Yeah. That's a very practical question. We are very close to the point when you can tell an AI, go out there, make money, your goal is to make $1 billion. Yeah. In computer science, very often the difficult question is, how do you define the goal? Yeah. And one of the things about money, it's a very easy goal to define. Yeah. Now, an AI can make money in many ways. It can hire its services to people to write their essays or books or whatever, many things it can do. It can earn money. It can then invest this money in the stock exchange. Yeah. So do we as a society want to allow AI agents, and then this is not a question for 50 years. This is a question for 5 years, maybe 1 year, to open bank accounts and manage them in any way they see fit. Yeah. In the US, basically, the legal system, they never thought about it, but I'm not sure about the situation in the UK, but in the US, there is an open legal path for AIs to be recognized as persons with rights.
Yes, Pete Singer has written about this and
Because,
others.
yeah, according to US law, corporations are persons and they have rights like freedom of speech.
Yes.
Now, so in the US, you can incorporate an AI. Previously, when you incorporated a corporation like Google or General Motors or whatever, this was a fiction.
Yeah.
Because all the decisions of Google were made by human beings.
Yes.
So, okay, legally, Google is a person with rights, but every decision of Google needs a human executive, accountant, engineer, lawyer to make the decision. Yeah. Now this is no longer the case. Yeah. You can incorporate an AI, and the AI can make the decisions by itself.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that the US Supreme Court recognize corporations as persons is in order to make it possible for corporations to donate money to politicians. This was the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. Right. Now, so imagine an AI that makes billions of dollars. It's maybe the richest person in the US in a few years will not be Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. It will be an AI. Yeah. And this AI has the freedom of speech, which includes the right to donate money to politicians, maybe on condition that they further advance rights for AI.
Absolutely, and reduce guardrails and so forth. Yes.
Now, this is a completely realistic scenario. This is not like science fiction.
No, absolutely.
So, and this is a question that we as a society need to decide, do we acknowledge AIs as persons with rights? Now, there are people who are already convinced that AIs, because they have interaction with them, have consciousness, have feelings. So maybe in a few years, the world is divided between countries that recognize AIs as persons with rights and countries that don't.
Absolutely. And I suppose for everyone in the room, there's a consideration. I remember I gave a talk on AI back in 2015 in Hay-on-Wye, and I said that the way things are going, there are certain jobs that people might not have. I said, for example, if you have a child who's studying to be a doctor, that's fine, but maybe a radiologist. And woman put her hand up very crossly and said, my daughter's studying radiology. And I said, well, you know, imagine that every mammogram ever taken is available to an AI and it can examine thousands in a second and make a judgment on it. A radiologist is going to go out of work. Now, who's going to go out of work here? I don't know if the chief financial officer is present of Octopus, but I have been sort of talking to some people who say that the first really high-level job to be replaced by an AI completely will be a CFO. They can be so well, everything they do.
I mean, it's already happened. It's news editors.
Oh, really?
One of the most important jobs in the 20th century, even before, was news editors. Yeah. The editors of the newspapers, of the television, they were extremely powerful people who control the public conversation.
Yeah. But I think what I would just end by saying to everybody is maybe don't concentrate on how efficient you are, on how brilliantly you complete a task, because that's what AI can do, especially the agentic AI that Yuval's been talking about. Concentrate on what a wonderful human being you are, how kind you are, how courteous, how considerate, how you improve the life of those around you, which is very often the opposite of what efficient people do. And maybe that, for the time being, at least, is the secret, that human exceptionalism will be how good we are as people, how much we make a room light up when we walk into it, how much pleasure we spread, not how quickly we can complete a task, because we'll never match the AI. So on that note, at least I think we should end, and I hope we haven't given too much terror to everybody. I will always say that the thing about this technology is it's simultaneously thrilling and chilling. And the thrilling parts may well cause us all to live much longer, happier lives. We can hope so. But Yuval, as always, an absolute joy speaking to you, and thank you for...
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Imagine an AI that makes billions of dollars. The richest person in the US in a few years will not be Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. It will be an AI. And this AI has the freedom of speech, which includes the right to donate money to politicians, maybe on condition that they further advance rights for AI. This is a completely realistic scenario. This is a question that we as a society need to decide: do we acknowledge AIs as persons with rights? There are people who are already convinced that AIs, because they have interaction with them, have consciousness, feelings. So maybe in a few years the world is divided between countries that recognize AIs as persons with rights, and countries that don't.